The morning of March 20th, 1943. The North Atlantic heaved and churned beneath a steel-grey sky, waves as tall as houses crashing across convoy HX-229. Deep in the hull of the SS William Moultrie, a Liberty ship barely 3 months old, Chief Engineer Robert Hayes felt the vessel shudder as another torpedo exploded nearby. Water hammered against riveted steel. The convoy scattered like frightened fish, each ship twisting desperately to evade the wolf pack circling in the darkness. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So, if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Around him, the engine room crew worked with grim efficiency, coaxing every revolution from the aging triple-expansion steam engine. The ship groaned, her welded seams flexing under the strain. Above deck, 9 merchant vessels burned, their crews abandoning ship into lifeboats that would drift for hours before rescue. The U-boats pressed their advantage. Admiral Karl Dönitz had 40 submarines converging on this convoy alone. They believed victory was within reach, but what the Germans did not yet understand was that for every ship they sank, American shipyards were launching 3 more. The William Moultrie, dismissed by German naval intelligence as primitive and expendable, was part of a production miracle that would rewrite the rules of industrial warfare. In the coming months, the tide of the Atlantic would turn not because of superior tactics or heroic sacrifice alone, but because of simple, ugly cargo ships built faster than anyone thought possible. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The Germans called them emergency freighters. Propaganda broadcasts mocked their crude welding, their boxy hulls, their slow speed. To Kriegsmarine officers, these ships represented everything weak about American industry: quantity over quality, haste over craftsmanship. They assumed such vessels would break apart in Atlantic storms, that their inexperienced crews would panic under U-boat attack. They were wrong on nearly every count, and by the time they realized their mistake, the Battle of the Atlantic was already lost. To understand how a ship considered primitive became the weapon that broke the U-boat blockade, we must return to 1941, when Britain stood on the edge of starvation, and America had not yet entered the war. The shipping crisis began long before Pearl Harbor. By May of 1941, German U-boats were sinking merchant vessels at a rate 3 times faster than British shipyards could replace them. Combined British and American production still fell short by more than half. The mathematics were brutal. Britain imported nearly 70% of its food, almost all of its petroleum, and vast quantities of raw materials for war production. If the merchant fleet collapsed, the island would fall without a single German soldier setting foot on English soil. Admiral Dönitz understood this perfectly. He had calculated that sinking 700,000 tons of shipping per month would strangle Britain within a year. His U-boats, operating in coordinated wolf packs, came terrifyingly close to achieving that goal. Between January and June of 1942, they sank over 3 million tons of Allied shipping in what German submariners called the Second Happy Time. The British government, desperate for solutions, turned to American shipyards. But traditional shipbuilding methods were far too slow. A standard cargo ship required 6 to 8 months to construct, with skilled riveters working each plate into place by hand. America had the industrial capacity, but not the time. What was needed was a revolution in how ships were built. Arrived in the form of a man who had never built a ship in his life. Henry J. Kaiser was an industrialist who had made his fortune constructing dams. Hoover Dam, Bonneville Dam, Grand Coulee. He understood concrete and steel, logistics and mass production. When the U.S. Maritime Commission approached him in 1940 about building cargo ships, he saw not a maritime challenge but an industrial one. Kaiser's insight was simple but radical. Stop thinking of ships as ships. Think of them as products to be assembled. He adapted techniques from automobile manufacturing, treating a Liberty ship as a collection of prefabricated modules that could be welded together on the slipway. Instead of building from the keel up with a single crew, Kaiser's yards constructed entire sections, bulkheads, deckhouses, engine rooms, in separate areas of the shipyard. These sections travelled on railroad flat cars from factories across the country, arriving at the shipyard ready to be lifted into place by massive cranes. The design itself was deliberately crude. The British had developed the Ocean-class freighter, a simple vessel powered by an old-fashioned triple-expansion steam engine. The Americans modified this design, replacing much of the riveting with welding to save time and labour. The result was designated EC-2SC-1, Emergency Cargo, 441 feet long, steam-powered, design C-1. It was christened the Liberty Ship, President Franklin D. Roosevelt himself admitted it was a dreadful-looking object. Time magazine called it an ugly duckling. The ships had flat sides, a single, tall smokestack, and a utilitarian profile that suggested industrial pragmatism rather than naval elegance. They looked like floating warehouses, because that's exactly what they were meant to be. Each Liberty ship could carry 9,000 tons of cargo. That meant 2,840 jeeps, or 440 tanks, or 230 million rounds of rifle ammunition. A crew of 44 civilian merchant seamen operated the vessel, while 20 naval armed guards manned the defensive weapons, 9 large guns to fend off aircraft and surface raiders. The ships were designed to be expendable. Engineers calculated they would last 5 years at most. If a Liberty ship made just one successful crossing of the Atlantic, delivering its cargo to Britain, it would have paid for itself. At an average cost of $1.8 million, they were cheap enough to lose and simple enough to replace. German intelligence officers, analysing photographs of the first Liberty ships, dismissed them as desperate measures. The welding, they noted, was inferior to traditional riveted construction. The triple expansion engines were obsolete technology, decades old. The ships had a top speed of 11 knots, slower than a surfaced U-boat. In night surface attacks, U-boats could easily outrun and outmaneuver such lumbering targets. What the Germans failed to grasp was that speed and elegance did not matter. Volume did. Kaiser's shipyards were not just building ships. They were building them faster than anyone in history. The first Liberty ship, the SS Patrick Henry, was launched in Baltimore on September 27, 1941. It took 197 days to complete. Kaiser looked at that timeline and saw inefficiency. Within months, he had cut construction time to 45 days. His workers, many of them women and African Americans who had never set foot in a shipyard before, learned welding in a matter of weeks. Ballet dancers were hired to walk narrow steel beams, their balance and precision making them ideal for dangerous high work. When steel shortages threatened production, Kaiser built his own steel mill in Fontana, California, completing it 5 months ahead of a government facility that had a years-long head start. The shipyards operated around the clock, 3 shifts of 8 hours each. Prefabricated sections arrived by rail and were lifted into place with a precision that would have seemed impossible just years earlier. By early 1943, Kaiser's yards were producing a Liberty ship on average every 42 days. Some yards worked even faster. In November of 1942, Kaiser's Richmond, California shipyard made headlines worldwide. The keel for the SS Robert E. Peary was laid at 1 minute past midnight on November 8th. Workers assembled 250,000 parts, weighing 14 million pounds. 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes later, the ship slid into the water, fully functional. It was a publicity stunt, a competition between yards to see who could build fastest. But it was also a demonstration of what American industrial might could achieve. The Robert E. Peary would go on to make numerous transatlantic crossings, surviving the war and not being scrapped until 1963, nearly 2 decades after the war ended. The Germans watched this production surge with growing alarm. Their intelligence estimates had calculated that America could produce 15.3 million tons of shipping in 1942 and 1943 combined. The actual figure exceeded 17 million tons. Dönitz had assumed that sinking 700,000 tons per month would cripple the Allies. But by 1943, with American shipyards in full operation, the target had leaped to 1.3 million tons per month. His U-boats could not keep pace. For every ship sunk, 2 or 3 more launched from American yards. The mathematics of attrition, once so favourable to Germany, were shifting inexorably against them. Still, the U-boats pressed their attacks with ferocious determination. March of 1943 saw the peak of the Battle of the Atlantic. German submarines sank 120 Allied ships, totalling nearly 700,000 tons. The battle around convoys HX-229 and SC-122 became the largest convoy engagement of the war. 40 U-boats attacked a combined convoy of over 100 ships, sinking 21 merchantmen in a running battle that lasted days. Among the wreckage were several Liberty ships, their crude welding torn open by torpedoes, their holds flooding as crews scrambled for lifeboats. German submariners radioed triumphant reports back to headquarters. The emergency freighters, they claimed, were breaking apart under attack. But even as those ships sank, replacements were already sliding down the ways in Baltimore, Portland, and Richmond. The production lines never stopped, and while the Germans celebrated tactical victories, the strategic picture was darkening. U-boat losses, once manageable, were climbing. In March, 12 submarines were destroyed. In April, 15. The Allies were learning new tactics, better radar, long-range aircraft, escort carriers, all converged to make the Atlantic increasingly lethal for U-boats. Then came May of 1943, the month that would break the back of the U-boat campaign forever. Convoy ONS-5 departed Liverpool on April 21st with 43 ships. Over the course of a week, it was attacked by more than 40 U-boats, the largest concentration of submarines ever assembled against a single convoy. 13 merchant ships were sunk, but the convoy escorts, equipped with improved radar and depth charges, destroyed 6 U-boats and severely damaged 7 more. The Germans had lost nearly as many submarines as they had sunk merchant vessels. That exchange ratio was unsustainable. More convoys followed, and with each one, U-boat losses mounted. On May 12th, convoy SC-130 passed through the North Atlantic without losing a single ship. 5 U-boats were sunk trying to attack it. Among the dead was Peter Dönitz, the admiral's youngest son, lost aboard U-954. By May 24th, Dönitz could no longer ignore the carnage. In a single month, his fleet had lost 43 U-boats, 25% of operational strength. It was the worst loss rate the Kriegsmarine had suffered in the entire war. More submarines had been destroyed in May 1943 than in all of 1941. Experienced crews, the backbone of the U-boat arm, were being wiped out faster than training schools could replace them. That evening, Dönitz issued the order that would define the remainder of the war at sea. All U-boats were to withdraw from the North Atlantic. The wolf packs, once the terror of the convoy routes, were recalled to port. The Battle of the Atlantic, though it would continue for 2 more years, had reached its turning point. Germany would never again threaten to sever Britain's lifeline. And the Liberty ships, those primitive emergency freighters, continued to pour from American shipyards at a rate of 5 per day. 18 shipyards across the United States, from Maine to California, were producing them. By the end of 1943, over 1,500 Liberty ships had been launched. By the end of the war in 1945, the total would reach 2,710 ships, the largest class of vessels ever built to a single design. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. German prisoners of war, brought to Allied ports after their capture, stared in disbelief at the rows of identical grey hulls lining the docks. "Where do they all come from?" one U-boat commander asked his interrogator. "We sink them, and they keep coming." His voice carried not anger but a weary resignation. The enemy he faced was not just the Royal Navy or skilled convoy escorts. It was the entire industrial capacity of the United States, churning out ships faster than Germany could ever hope to sink them. The men who sailed the Liberty ships understood their vessels were not built for comfort or elegance. They were built to cross an ocean, deliver cargo, and, if necessary, sink without taking too many lives with them. Merchant mariners, many of them volunteers, signed on knowing the odds. In 1942, 1 in 26 merchant ships sailing to Britain was sunk. By 1943, those odds had improved, but the danger remained ever present. Chief Engineer Thomas Maguire had sailed on cargo ships before the war, vessels with proper staterooms, polished brass fittings, engines that hummed rather than clanked. His first Liberty ship, the SS John Hancock, felt like a downgrade. The accommodations were Spartan. The engine room was cramped and loud, the triple expansion steam engine pounding away with a rhythm that shook the deck plates. The ship rolled heavily in rough seas, her flat bottom and boxy hull offering little stability. But Maguire came to respect the Liberty ship for what it was: functional, reliable, and surprisingly tough. Triple expansion engine, though old-fashioned, was simple enough that a competent crew could repair it at sea with basic tools. The welded hull, despite German claims of weakness, proved remarkably resilient. When Maguire's ship took minor damage from a near-miss depth charge dropped by a confused escort, the welded seams held. A riveted ship might have sprung leaks from dozens of loosened rivets. The Liberty flexed and absorbed the shock. Not all Liberty ships were so fortunate. The early vessels suffered from a critical design flaw that would claim several ships in dramatic fashion. The problem was brittle fracture, a phenomenon not fully understood by engineers in the early 1940s. The steel used in Liberty ship construction, combined with the stress concentrations created by square hatch corners and welded seams, made the hulls vulnerable to sudden catastrophic failure in cold water. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. On January 16, 1943, the SS Schenectady, fresh from the shipyard, cracked completely in half while sitting peacefully at the dock in Portland, Oregon. No storm, no torpedo, no collision. The ship simply split apart with a sound like a rifle shot, the two halves sagging away from each other. Crew members standing on deck found themselves staring across a widening gap at their shipmates on the other half of the vessel. Over the course of the war, nearly 1,500 Liberty ships experienced significant brittle fractures. 12 ships, including the SS John P. Gaines, broke completely in half and sank. The Gaines went down on November 24, 1943, killing 10 men. Investigations revealed that the steel's transition temperature, the point at which it became brittle, was far too high. In the cold waters of the North Atlantic, especially in winter, the steel lost its ductility and fractured under stress. The solution came through improved steel quality and design modifications. Engineers added riveted crack arrestor straps running the length of the hull, designed to stop fractures from propagating. Hatch corners were rounded rather than square, eliminating stress concentration points. Later, Liberty ships used better quality steel with lower transition temperatures. The improvements worked. The rate of catastrophic failures dropped dramatically, though the problem never entirely disappeared. For the German U-boat commanders who encountered Liberty ships in combat, the vessels presented a frustrating target. They were slow, yes, but that made them difficult to miss with torpedoes. Their large cargo capacity meant a single hit could send thousands of tons of war material to the bottom. Yet there were always more Liberty ships. The convoys that limped into British ports, battered and reduced in number, would be replaced by fresh convoys within days, each containing a dozen or more of the grey-hulled freighters. Kapitän-Leutnant Werner Henke, commander of U-515, was one of the most successful U-boat aces of the war. In April 1943, he attacked convoy TS-37 off the coast of West Africa and sank 4 tankers in 3 minutes, followed by 3 more in the next 6 hours. It was one of the most devastating single attacks of the entire campaign. Henke reported his success to headquarters with satisfaction, noting the tonnage destroyed. What he could not see was the American response. For every tanker he had sunk, 2 more were being completed in shipyards across the United States. Kaiser's Vancouver shipyard alone built 49 oil tankers of the T2 class, larger and faster than the Liberty ships. The Houston Shipbuilding Corporation produced similar vessels at a rate that would have seemed impossible before the war. By the time Henke's U-515 returned to port for resupply, the Allies had replaced his entire month's worth of sinkings and added a net gain of ships to the fleet. The psychological impact on U-boat crews was devastating. In the early years of the war, submarine service had been elite duty. U-boat men saw themselves as hunters, skilled predators stalking the convoy routes. But by mid-1943, they had become the hunted. Allied escort carriers, equipped with radar and carrying aircraft that could spot a periscope from miles away, turned the Atlantic into a killing ground for submarines. Long-range B-24 Liberator bombers closed the mid-Atlantic gap, the stretch of ocean that had once been beyond the reach of land-based aircraft. U-boats could no longer surface safely to recharge batteries or run their diesel engines. They were forced to remain submerged for longer periods, operating on electric motors that moved them at a crawl. When they did surface, Allied aircraft appeared within minutes, forcing crash dives that left the crew exhausted and demoralized. The Wolfpack tactics that had worked so well in 1942 became suicidal by 1943. Gathering multiple U-boats for a coordinated attack meant gathering multiple targets for Allied escorts and aircraft. Radar could detect a surfaced submarine from 20 miles away. By the time the U-boats closed on a convoy, the escorts were already maneuvering to intercept them. Depth charges, improved with better fusing and more powerful explosives, could crush a submarine's pressure hull at depths the Germans had once considered safe. In May 1943, U-boat commander after U-boat commander radioed similar reports back to headquarters. Convoy, heavily escorted. Aircraft overhead. Unable to approach. Attacked by destroyer. Severe damage. Returning to base. Aircraft sighted. Crash dive. Depth charges. Lost contact with convoy. The stream of messages told Dönitz what he already knew. His submarines were losing the war of attrition. And still, the Liberty ship came. By the summer of 1943, over 1,000 had been completed. They sailed in convoys of 50 or 60 ships, protected by destroyers, corvettes, and escort carriers. The convoys moved with ponderous inevitability across the Atlantic, delivering hundreds of thousands of tons of supplies to Britain every month. Fuel oil, ammunition, aircraft, tanks, food, raw materials, everything needed to sustain a nation at war and to build up forces for the eventual invasion of Europe. The Liberty ships also sailed to the Soviet Union on the brutal Murmansk run, where Arctic cold and German air attacks from occupied Norway made every voyage a nightmare. They carried supplies to North Africa, supporting the campaigns in Tunisia and later the invasion of Italy. In the Pacific, Liberty ships transported troops and equipment for the island-hopping campaign against Japan. They were the logistical backbone of the Allied war effort, unglamorous, but absolutely essential. Crew members developed a grudging affection for their ships. The Liberty might roll like a pig in heavy seas, her engine might be old-fashioned, her accommodations might be cramped, but she got the job done. Sailors gave their ships nicknames, painted nose art on the bows when regulations permitted, treated the vessels with a mixture of respect and dark humour. "She's ugly," one merchant seaman wrote to his wife, "but she's ours, and she floats." If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The technical improvements continued throughout the war. Later, Liberty ships incorporated lessons learned from earlier vessels. Propeller designs were refined for better efficiency. Steam systems were improved to reduce fuel consumption. Defensive armament was upgraded, with more anti-aircraft guns added to counter the threat of long-range German bombers. Some Liberty ships were modified for specialized roles, converted into repair ships, hospital ships, or even makeshift aircraft transports. The shipyards themselves evolved into massive industrial complexes. Kaiser's Richmond yards alone employed over 90,000 workers at their peak, with 4 separate shipyards operating side by side. The Oregon Shipbuilding Corporation in Portland built 330 Liberty ships and 99 of the larger, faster Victory ships that replaced the Liberty class, starting in 1944. The sheer scale of production was staggering. At peak capacity, American shipyards were launching a new ocean-going vessel every 8 hours. This industrial surge did not go unnoticed in Germany. Albert Speer, Hitler's Minister of Armaments and War Production, studied reports on American shipbuilding with growing alarm. He understood that Germany could not match such output. German shipyards were building U-boats at a rate of about 20 per month, impressive by any standard. But the Allies were destroying them faster than they could be replaced, while simultaneously building merchant ships at 10 times the rate the U-boats could sink them. Speer recommended to Hitler that resources be diverted from U-boat construction to other weapons systems, arguing that the submarine campaign was a lost cause. Hitler, influenced by Dönitz's insistence that new technologies would turn the tide, refused. Work continued on advanced Type XXI U-boats, submarines with improved underwater performance and greater range. But these boats arrived too late and in too few numbers to make any difference. The final year of the war saw Liberty ships sailing in relative safety. By 1944, U-boat sinkings in the Atlantic had dropped to negligible levels. Convoys crossed with minimal losses. The threat that had once seemed capable of strangling Britain had been reduced to a nuisance. Allied air superiority over the Atlantic was so complete that U-boats could barely operate. Those that tried were quickly hunted down and destroyed. On June 6, 1944, Liberty ships played a crucial role in Operation Overlord, the invasion of Normandy. Dozens of them carried troops, vehicles, and supplies across the English Channel. The SS Robert E. Peary, the ship built in less than 5 days, was among them, shuttling men and equipment from Britain to Omaha Beach under constant threat of German artillery and air attack. She survived the war, a testament to the durability of a design once dismissed as primitive. The final Liberty ship, the SS Benjamin Warner, was launched on September 30th, 1945, months after Germany's surrender but while war with Japan still raged. By then, 2,710 Liberty ships had been completed, an average of 3 ships every 2 days for nearly 4 years. It remains the largest single class of ships ever built. The effort had required the labour of over 1.5 million workers across 18 at shipyards, consuming vast quantities of steel, timber, and other materials. The cost in human life was also significant. Merchant mariners suffered one of the highest casualty rates of any service in the war. 1 in 26 merchant ships was sunk, and when a ship went down, survival in the cold Atlantic was measured in minutes. Over 9,000 American merchant mariners died during the war, many of them aboard Liberty ships torpedoed in the dark of night, their crews given no time to abandon ship before the vessels broke apart and sank. But for every ship lost, more arrived. The Germans had bet on a war of attrition, believing they could sink ships faster than the Allies could build them. They were correct in their assessment of British and early American shipbuilding capacity. What they failed to anticipate was the transformation that mass production techniques would bring to shipbuilding. Henry Kaiser's revolution, dismissed by traditionalists as crude and unsustainable, proved to be the decisive factor in the Battle of the Atlantic. After the war, Admiral Dönitz, on trial at Nuremberg for war crimes, was asked about the U-boat campaign. He acknowledged that by May 1943, the campaign had become hopeless. "The Americans were building more ships than we could sink," he said simply. It was an admission of defeat rooted not in tactics or courage, but in mathematics. The industrial capacity of the United States, fully mobilized and directed toward wartime production, had overwhelmed Germany's ability to respond. Many Liberty ships survived the war and continued sailing for decades. Some were sold to private companies and renamed, serving as cargo vessels well into the 1960s and 70s. A few were converted into stationary storage vessels or repair ships. Most were eventually scrapped, their steel recycled for peacetime use. But a handful remain, preserved as museum ships and memorials to the men who built and sailed them. The Courting Frains, SS Jeremiah O'Brien, launched in 1943, still floats in San Francisco Bay, maintained in operational condition by a dedicated crew of volunteers. Visitors can tour her decks, descend into the engine room where the triple expansion engine still turns over during occasional demonstration cruises, and stand in the wheelhouse where merchant mariners once scanned the horizon for U-boat periscopes. The ship is a time capsule, a reminder of an era when industrial production and human determination combined to change the course of history. The SS John W. Brown, another Liberty ship preserved in Baltimore, tells a similar story. Both ships participated in the 50th anniversary commemoration of D-Day in 1994, crossing the Atlantic under their own power to join the celebration in Normandy. That two Liberty ships, over 50 years old and built to last only 5, could still make such a voyage speaks to the unexpected quality of their construction. What the Germans called primitive proved to be remarkably enduring. The legacy of the Liberty ship extends beyond the vessels themselves. The mass production techniques pioneered by Henry Kaiser and his contemporaries revolutionized American industry. Modular construction, prefabrication, welding instead of riveting, all became standard practices in post-war shipbuilding and other industries. The lessons learned in the shipyards of World War II influenced everything from commercial construction to aerospace manufacturing. But perhaps the most important legacy is the demonstration of what industrial democracies can achieve when fully mobilized. The Liberty Ship program showed that free societies, properly organized and motivated, could outproduce authoritarian regimes that prided themselves on efficiency and discipline. The Germans had built an impressive war machine, but they could not match the sheer scale of American production once it reached full capacity. The irony is profound. German engineers and naval officers, trained in traditions of craftsmanship and precision, dismissed the Liberty ship as a crude emergency measure unworthy of serious consideration. They were correct that the Liberty ship was not elegant. They were correct that it used obsolete technology. What they failed to understand was that in modern industrial warfare, quantity has a quality all its own. 2,710 ships in 4 years. That number tells the story more clearly than any tactical analysis or strategic assessment. The U-boats fought bravely and sank hundreds of merchant vessels, but they were fighting against an opponent that could absorb losses and replace them faster than they could be inflicted. The Atlantic became not a battlefield where skill and courage determined victory, but a production line where tonnage launched exceeded tonnage, sunk month after month, until the outcome became inevitable. The merchant mariners who sailed the Liberty ships knew they were part of something larger than themselves. They understood that every successful convoy, every cargo delivered, brought the end of the war closer. When they stood on deck and watched the escort carriers overhead, when they saw the long lines of grey-hulled freighters stretching to the horizon, they saw not just ships, but the physical manifestation of their nation's commitment to victory. And in the cold waters of the Atlantic, in the broken hulls of U-boats sent to the bottom by Allied escorts, German submariners came to understand the same truth. They had been ordered to wage a tonnage war, to sink ships faster than they could be replaced. For a time, it seemed possible, but the flood of Liberty ships, those primitive emergency freighters, turned possibility into impossibility. The war they thought they could win became unwinnable the moment American shipyards began launching vessels faster than U-boats could sink them. By 1945, with the war in Europe over and Japan facing invasion, Liberty ships continued to sail. They carried occupation troops to Germany, transported refugees, delivered humanitarian aid to devastated cities. Some were converted to carry war brides and their children to America, reuniting families separated by years of conflict. The ships that had helped win the war now helped win the peace. In the decades that followed, historians and military analysts studied the Battle of the Atlantic, searching for the decisive moment when the tide turned. Some pointed to the breaking of the Enigma Code, which allowed Allied forces to route convoys around wolf packs. Others emphasized the role of escort carriers and long-range aircraft in hunting U-boats. All of these factors mattered. But underneath every tactical and technological advantage lay a simple truth. The Allies had more ships than the Germans could sink. The Liberty ship made that possible. 2,710 vessels, built by workers who had never set foot in a shipyard before the war, launched from ways that did not exist when the war began, sailing across oceans to deliver the material that would defeat fascism. They were not beautiful, they were not fast, they were not sophisticated. But they were enough, and in the end, that was all that mattered. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.